All right, I think we'll get started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this Friday morning. My name is Alyssa Vine. I'm the University Director of Credit for Prior Learning in CUNY's Central Office of Academic Affairs. And I am delighted to introduce to you today Dr. Wendy Kilgore, who's the Senior Director of Research at AACRAO, which is the American Association of Collegiate Registrars and Admissions Officers. Wendy is also the author of a report that came from AACRAO last year titled Enhancing Accessibility and Inclusion, the 2024 Landscape of Credit for Prior Learning in the U.S. and Canadian Higher Education. When we saw this report earlier this year, I think that we saw a lot that spoke to the ways that CUNY is thinking about credit for prior learning in terms of equity and access, and just the role that credit for prior learning stands to play within higher education for our students and the populations that we're looking to serve in New York. This event is the third in our professional development series that we've held this fall. The other sessions that have already taken place are available on the CUNY CPL website, and this one, today's session, is also being recorded and will be available there as well. And we have some other sessions coming up later this year as well. But we feel that this one is going to be a really good opportunity for us to think a little bit bigger than CUNY and outside of our own scope and really understand what's happening in credit for prior learning nationally. And we're just so lucky to have Wendy with us today. And I will hand over to her. I'll be chiming in throughout to share some context and perspective from CUNY, but we are really fortunate to have Wendy's expertise guiding our session today.
Alyssa, thank you very much for having me here, and welcome everyone. I want to say, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat or in the, are we going to use the Q&A or just the chat or both? Alyssa, I forgot, sorry.
Chat is fine, just chat is fine today.
Okay, in the chat. Well, you can use it in the chat, and she and I will be really tag teaming back and forth on this information. So I'll give a little bit about the national perspective, and then she'll, as she said, dive into the CUNY perspective on it. And I want to say that what we're sharing here today is derived from a green paper that was sponsored by SOVA, that AACRAO is helping them do the Learn Commission series of green papers. It's about learning mobility throughout the spectrum of how that works. The first one we did was on traditional transfer. The second is on credit for prior learning. The third is going to be on dual enrollment, and the fourth will be on the use of artificial intelligence to support learning mobility. Those will all be deployed over the next year. At the end of this session, we have a QR code that links to the green paper, which actually then has subsequent links to related research, including the report that Alyssa just mentioned. And for those of you who attended the CALE session in October, a couple of these slides are going to be quite familiar, and then we'll dive into some newer content, because CALE did help us shape our survey for the work we did here. So in today's learning economy, learning happens everywhere, as we know. So there's learners that come in with all different kinds of experiences that allows them to acquire things that can be measured by our student learning outcomes in our courses. So many undergraduate or post-traditional learners with valuable experience coming from these sources. And actually the terminology is moving to the new modern student. New modern learner, I think, is the terminology, or something along those lines, actually, because we are trending away from traditional learners. And extra classroom activities facilitate the educational pathways for a lot of these learners. This is a definition you've seen, because this is CALE's definition, that it's a mechanisms that to evaluate learning occurs outside the classroom. It's also called prior learning assessment, but today we're going to use credit for prior learning and as we talk. We have some common pathways for CPL. This standardized by CALE. They put some definitions out there. Most institutions offer one or more of these. And we can say that while they typically include in most institutions' definition academic advanced placement and international baccalaureate, when we talk about our data, it doesn't include that information. The reason is, when we're talking about post-traditional learners and all these other pathways they come in, that AP and IB are exclusively related to high school learners and only accessible by high school learners. So when we talk about our data, it's really about all those other categories of assessment, except for those two. I heard someone say it the other day that CPL is the AP and IB for adults. You know, it's really, we try to convince some institutions who don't currently offer it, but they do accept AP and IB. We say, well, you accept that. It's the same kind of model, the same kind of measurements. We go ahead and apply it to the non-traditional, post-traditional learners. And Alyssa?
Sure. So just to build on Wendy's previous slide, I wanted to just take a moment to share some broad strokes of CUNY's policy and the mechanisms that are included there. So in CUNY's policy, we name 6 different standardized exam programs. We actually do include AP and IB within our definition of or our named standardized exam programs. And all CUNY colleges must award credit for qualifying scores on these 6 exam programs. And those qualifying scores are defined within the policy. The next mechanism for credit for prior learning that is specified in CUNY's policy is non-collegiate learning. So this refers to different kinds of industry credentials, professional certifications and licenses. This can be military training and occupations. It can also be different forms of like continuing ed offerings that have been that articulate to credit-bearing coursework. And CUNY colleges are able to award credit for non-collegiate learning based on a few different resources. Colleges can look to recommendations from the American Council on Education, or NCCRS, which are 2 national organizations that conduct faculty evaluation and provide recommendations for CPL equivalencies and credit awards. Colleges can also look to one another's CPL equivalencies, and we can talk more about that later. And for forms of non-collegiate learning that have not been pre-evaluated by another CUNY college or by these national organizations, you know, CUNY points to a professional learning evaluation process by which colleges at the academic department level, faculty are able to do a deep dive and really understand the learning outcomes and the content of a learning experience in order to determine if they will award credit for prior learning for it. The other mechanisms that are named within CUNY's policy include portfolio assessment, which are optional for CUNY colleges, but can be a really good way of doing individualized assessment. There are also other forms of individualized assessment that CUNY colleges can opt to make available to students, as well as challenge exams. Departments can develop challenge exams for particular circumstances in order to use that as a mechanism for assessing learning and determining alignment with credit-bearing coursework. So those are the mechanisms named within CUNY's policy. All of them are also parts that are named in AACRAO's report. So I will hand back over to Wendy at this point.
Thank you, Alyssa. Many benefits of credit for prior learning for learners, and it first and foremost, it validates their experiences, and it doesn't make them take classes over again. So you can say, they can come into you and say, as you guys know, I already speak Spanish because I'm bilingual, and you know, I want to get a Spanish degree or a Spanish certificate, or you get some formal recognition for that, because if I have it, it then helps me with my employment. And it grants that to them without them having to take the traditional classroom experience. It also accelerates their credential attainment and reduces the costs and promotes persistence, that they have a more likely to graduate if they have credit for prior learning. That's what CAEL's multiple institution data has said over and over, as is WICHE's. So students that are awarded credit for prior learning, they tend to stick around. And we also have some benefits for the institutions. There's actually increased revenue. They, if you can believe it, they earn 17.6 more credit hours on average than those who are not awarded credit for prior learning. And that's based upon that persistence. So they stick around. They already have a leg up towards what they want to do, and they tend to come in knowing more what they want to do, a little bit less undecided than some other learners. And it also serves as a recruiting tool. They found that there's some data that has pointed to that learners positively influenced on the institutional choice by the availability of credit for prior learning. And that's how it's visible. Is it really visible to the student? Is the process easy for them to undertake and get the credit for it, and it makes them make their decision to attend that institution. And as I said before, it increases the percentage of learners who complete a credential by as much as 2.5%, 2.5 times higher than those without credit for prior learning. So it is an important tool for both the learners and the institution. We have a current landscape, though. Our survey was a big one. We were a beast. We warned people in advance it was a big one. This is the second time we've deployed this in partnership with CPL. The first time was a few years ago, and we wanted to see what the landscape, whether it had changed or not. But the landscape still remains fairly similar. There's a bunch of highly complex policies and practices around CPL, about how they're evaluated, how they're assessed, how they are transcripted, how the students are made aware of it, and how faculty are engaged, and are a number of the ways in which they're different across institutions. They are actually also inconsistent policies within an institution and across institutions. So the one college within a system may award CPL in only certain categories of the available paths you saw before, and transcript them in a certain way. And another college within the same system, not necessarily CUNY, will transcript them a different way and award it a different way. Sometimes it happens from department to department. So there's faculty members who are making decisions that are slightly different in their rubric decision making. So it's a really complex system, more so than traditional credit and dual enrollment credit awarding and evaluation. We also found here and elsewhere in the research that is linked in the green paper that I will share with you at the end, that there's limited learner awareness. So WICHE and CPL and others have done student focus groups, student surveys, engagements, and found that learners really don't understand what credit for prior learning or prior learning assessment, or whatever it's called at the institution, aren't aware of it. And there's also lack of learner support. So you have that, we have to make you aware of it so you know it's an option for you. And then we have to support you and how you go through the process, because each of those different things that Alyssa shared and I shared and CPL shared about the pathways, each of those pathways has a different way to process credit for prior learning. And a single learner might actually be able to take a test for one particular category of prior learning they have, for example, language learning, or they might have to submit a portfolio for something else. And they're very different processes.
Yeah, so there's actually already a couple of questions in the chat that I think I can address in this slide and the next couple of slides. So just to reflect on some of these challenging, complicated aspects of credit for prior learning that Wendy is highlighting. I think that we do often hear questions from colleges or from faculty about CUNY's policy, and so I wanted to highlight a few points about the policy that I think will be clarifying for this audience, and that hopefully through more professional development and through more dialogue with colleges, we can help to clarify. I think it's really important for CUNY, the CUNY population, to understand that faculty are really at the heart of this work. Faculty are the ones who are really charged with determining the alignment and deciding the appropriate equivalencies and credit awards based on the course offerings in their department. I think that, I see the comment about one college does award credit and other colleges don't award credit in a particular case, referring to pre-calculus, in particular, the AP exam. Michael is jumping in to clarify that actually is a violation of policy, since those exams are specifically named in the policy itself. But what that credit award is really the purview of faculty. I think it's also important to point out that the policy does specify that credit for prior learning can be awarded for major courses. It can be awarded for to fulfill general education requirements. It can also be awarded to fulfill departmental electives. The policy does discourage the use of general elective credit unless there's no other option, because it is not as beneficial to students in terms of their degree progression. Another point, and I think there's a question in the chat here, although I may be falling a little bit behind on what's being asked, but I saw somebody was asking about transfer, and CUNY's policy is pretty specific on this point. A student who earns credit for prior learning at one CUNY college, when they transfer to another CUNY college, the CPL credit that they awarded, it transfers as though they took that course at the college, and it's not subject to reevaluation at the receiving college. The application of that credit at the receiving college, depending on if they change their major or the college's specific offerings, that may change the way that that particular course applies to the student's transcript, but they're not able to say we don't award credit for that. It transfers the same way that it would as if the student took that course at the original college. Another common question that we get that I think is important to clarify is that CPL credits do not fulfill a residency requirement. So they're similar to transfer credits in that regard. If you want to move on, Wendy.
Thank you. So back to the larger landscape, and thank you for introducing some of those things, because they actually differ from the national landscape in some ways, so the majority of the national landscape. And that's actually really good that CUNY is doing if it's credited at institution, recognized, it's going to transfer. That's fantastic. We have 82% of institutions offer some sort of CPL. Our sample was nearly 400 institutions. And we are specifically speaking about undergraduate credit for prior learning. We did not dive into the graduate credit for prior learning, which is actually an emerging field, but it's not as robust and established as the undergraduate level. So 82% of institutions in this sample offer some form of CPL. And again, that's exclusive of the IPIB category, and it was all those others.
Hi there.
We're talking about non-traditional learners. But 54% of institutions do not accept CPL and transfer. But within the sample of institutions that offer CPL, 59 do not accept it in transfer %, 28 accept it conditionally, and 13 accept it unconditionally. So it's an interesting category of institutions. They say we were absolutely willing to offer it, but we're not going to accept it in transfer. So that's different from CUNY, though. Why is this a problem? Probably pretty obvious why it's a problem, but there's actually, because there's significant variation in the way institutions transcript CPL credits, it makes it difficult for institutions to actually differentiate that for incoming students, and they apply it inconsistently to students. So, for example, if we have a student who gets CPL credit, let's call it Spanish 101 and 102, because they took a language test or spoke with a faculty member or whatever you needed to do to get that credit. And they're at institution A, and somebody at institution B did similar work for Spanish 101 and 102. Institution A transcripts it as CUNY does, and Alyssa, correct me if I get your interpretation of your practices wrong. Transcripts it so it looks like a course. It looks like Spanish 1 and Spanish 102. The other institution, institution B, transcripts it so it looks like credit for prior learning. It's differentiated. Those two students then try to transfer to the institution C. Person here on the institution A gets credit because it looks like transfer credit. Person over here does not. So that receiving institution's policy is being inequitably applied based upon the transcript practices of the previous two institutions and their own internal practice of saying we don't accept CPL and transfer. That is one of the things the Learn Commission is trying to tackle with accreditors and the members of the Learn Commission this year to put out some national recommendations. Federal regulations require that institutions must provide easy access to CPL information. Only 69% of institutions in this sample make the policy easily accessible on their website or in their academic catalog. And many accreditors also require CPL transparency, but provide a lot of room for institutions to determine what that policy and practice look like locally. And Alyssa is going to talk about what that means to you.
Thanks, Wendy. As everyone here is aware, I'm sure CUNY colleges that are accredited by Middle States does, both in its list of policies and also in its standards, reference credit for prior learning. it maintains that colleges should have clear, consistent, and transparent policies and procedures around CPL. That it says that colleges can enter into articulation agreements with partner organizations, and that the decision making about credit for prior learning should be made in the best interest of students. It also, and I think I already said this, it's named in the standards as well, as you can see on this slide here. But I think that that CUNY's policy is definitely inclusive and reflective of what Middle States calls for, and we aim to provide the guidance and standards of our own policy that will allow CUNY colleges to implement CPL programs that are consistent with what Middle States requires.
We also ask people about the affordability and what do they charge learners for these various pathways for credit for prior learning. We found that it varies wildly. So some don't charge a fee at all. Some charge a fee that differs by the pathway the credit is awarded. So portfolio versus testing versus IP versus AB. I get those backwards again. AP versus IB. Whatever the pathway may be, it varies. Some charge a flat fee, depending on the pathway. Some charge a fee based upon a number of credits awarded. So they may charge for a single credit, even if several credits are awarded. Some will charge for the evaluation, whether or not credit is awarded or not. Some will charge for the credit or the evaluation only if something is actually awarded. So there's no standard. Sometimes that fee is minimal, tens of dollars, and sometimes it goes up to hundreds, or depending on the tuition, it can be thousands of dollars. And Alyssa, would you want to speak about their CUNY's policy language about fees?
At this time, CUNY's policy does not specify any fees to students for credit for prior learning. We really do aim to make credit for prior learning a way that we're supporting affordability for students. I think it's really interesting and important for us to follow the national conversation on this and continue to learn and think about how we can best support our students. But that the language as of now, there are no fees for students.
CPL has equity gaps. I'm pretty sure if you attended because I looked at the CAO presentation, on the 25th of October, if you attended that session, they noted a lot of equity gaps. So there's a low percentage of post-traditional learners receiving CPL credit, even though they are the ones that have the ability to earn it most because of their life experiences. And also there's disparities by race and ethnicity and income. The income component possibly is because it is not covered by federal financial aid, so the fees are out of pocket. We also have the fact that institutions, when you ask them, hey, how well are your students doing? Because one of the arguments for institutions who don't offer CPL or won't accept CPL and transfer is we don't think those students are going to do as well when they get credit through credit for prior learning, and then they won't be prepared and be successful in subsequent courses. Part of the challenge around that story is the institutions have limited ability to track CPL applications and awarding of credit over time, and then subsequently being able to say, well, the students we have that did CPL did just as fine or better or possibly worse, it depends on the data, to say that to anybody who says, I have concerns about accepting your CPL and transfer, to have that data discussions or to even expand it at the institution. It's just limited because a lot of student information databases, for example, if they transcript it as a regular course and then don't subsequently go someplace else and put a student in a cohort or put a tag on them that marks them as a CPL awardee, or change the section number as an example that's tied to a class, and that section number then can be tracked to the next class to say, hey, did they do just as well? If they don't take that action, then it's really, really hard to gather this data and track it over time. But I think CUNY has some examples.
Yes, I think at CUNY, when we're thinking about tracking, we could sort of put this in three buckets. I think we're thinking about at the point of intake, what information are we able to gather from students in order to inform advising practices and to understand the types of skills and experiences and certifications and work backgrounds that students are coming in with. We have several colleges that are doing this in different ways. I included one example here from LaGuardia Community College, which has a CPL inquiry form that allows them to gather this information from students in order to, when the student meets with an advisor to discuss their potential eligibility, they're working off of information that can also become part of the students' records, that they're able to be consistent and thorough in what they're asking students. You wouldn't want somebody to not get credit for prior learning because they didn't think to say that they had a particular certification. But a series of questions that gathers that information is one way that some CUNY colleges are starting to track that piece of CPL. I think that the impact that credit for prior learning is having on students is another really important way that we want to improve our data practices and really start to understand who we're serving and who we're not serving. And CUNY School of Professional Studies uses a CUNY First student group designation to identify any students who receive CPL credit. And this allows them to really analyze their college data to understand the course taking practices and GPAs, the demographics of the students who are utilizing credit for prior learning. And I think that this is a way that they're able to really see and make clear statements about the impact that CPL is having on their students. It also allows them to identify equity gaps, and it also gives them a way of thinking about how to focus their energy and resources in terms of identifying places that they could develop more CPL opportunities or different entry points for different populations of prospective students. And then we're also thinking about tracking the different CPL opportunities that exist at each CUNY college and across the university. And the Office of Academic Affairs, working closely with the university registrar, has put forth guidance that colleges should be using to configure CPL equivalencies in CUNY First. So this means that, actually, Wendy, if you want to go to the next slide for a moment. So this means that when an academic department decides that they will be awarding credit for a particular learning experience, they should then work with their offices or their college's CPL lead. Each CUNY college has somebody who is designated as the responsible person or office that would be the point of contact there. And they would work with that person and with the college registrar's office to make sure that the specific credit award and equivalency are codified in CUNY First according to the university guidance, so that that information does become trackable as credit for prior learning. And also that means that it will feed into CUNY's Transfer Explorer tool, so that students would be able to see which courses which CUNY colleges would award credit for a particular learning experience. So this is an important factor to be aware of. And if you are working to determine these kinds of equivalencies, to know that this is a next step in that process. And I'm sure that most CUNY people here are familiar with Transfer Explorer. I'll just point out that there is a non-CUNY search function on Transfer Explorer that's very useful for credit for prior learning purposes, both for prospective students or others who are interested in seeing how particular learning experiences are or are not awarded credit at different CUNY colleges. And then also for faculty who are considering awarding credit for a particular learning experience, different trainings and certifications, you could look here and actually see how the courses that other colleges are awarding credit for are already transferring into your institution. It's a source of information that you can use to make an appropriate determination. Go ahead, Wendy.
Okay. Thank you. I actually really love the way CUNY's engaging with all this. It's amazing work that you guys are doing. I mentioned briefly earlier, the learner perceptions and experiences is mixed. We have limited access to information, even though it's required to be readily available. And we have learners who don't understand the process. So here's a couple quotes. So obviously I've had a lot of experience in life, but how do you put that into words and then submit it to someone else? So they need help to support and translate their experiences into academic terms. Another learner regretted not knowing about certain options earlier. If I had learned about CLEP tests before taking my basic classes, I would have used them, but I was unaware. So institutions must evaluate how learners discover CPL information and optimize outreach processes. We kind of assume a lot of the times that students just can find this on their own, and post-traditional learners, not necessarily the case. Earning credit for life work experience was discussed during orientation, but it sounded too complicated to pursue and was never mentioned again. This feedback suggests institutions need to introduce CPL options while simplifying the process and providing ongoing support. So mention it early and mention it often is one way we can talk about it. We also gathered some data points on faculty awareness of engagement with CPL. Well, we asked the primary contacts. This survey was not of faculty, but it was asked the primary contacts how much they agreed with our faculty are aware of CPL options for learners. So all the different various pathways. Pretty much mixed degree. They somewhat agree or neither agree or disagree in there. It's right in the middle. So pretty mixed about what institutions think about their faculty awareness. The reason this is important though, in a couple slides. Also asking whether or not they understood aware of the benefits of CPL for learners. Again, kind of mixed results right there in the middle, peaked between somewhat disagree, neither agree nor disagree, and agree, peaked in the middle. So this is why it's important though. So faculty awareness, right in the middle, not too bad, not really excellent. But 57% of faculty have some or all of the responsibility in this sample of external institutions, other institutions, for helping learners complete their portfolio of other individualized assessment in particular. AP and IB are typically processed by the registrar's office, standardized tests sometimes by the registrar's office, sometimes by assessment, sometimes by department. It varies a little bit, but this is specifically about portfolios and other individualized assessments. So that's how there was 57% are responsible for helping the learner get all the materials together, and 84% have some or all of the responsibility for assessing or evaluating portfolios or other individualized assessments. So even though I have kind of middle of the road awareness, we have a lot of engagement and actually helping learners and then making the evaluation among faculty. However, we have 66% of institutions have no formal training for anyone who is responsible for evaluating or assessing portfolios or other individualized assessments. And the 44 that do provide some training, 19% provide formal training to everyone, 6% for most, 9% for some. Of those, 13% of the institutions have standardized CPL training for faculty. And we're going to pause here for a poll.
We've got about 75% of participants have answered the poll at this point, so I'll go ahead and share those results.
Okay, from their academic leadership is out there as the biggest one. Word of mouth, learners, okay, across the board. So a lot of different perspectives on how CUNY faculty are made aware of CPL. Let's see how that compares to the national sample. So in the national, same sort of thing. We had most who thought that they learned about it from the faculty leadership. Your results in your little sample here are a little bit different from the national, but it's a word of mouth from learners and other ways. So there's not one outstanding way that faculty are made aware of it in the national sample or in this, what you guys think. And Alyssa?
Yeah, so I think that that at CUNY, we really believe very strongly that faculty are just so essential to this work. Their subject matter expertise and their awareness of curriculum and their thinking about alignment between curriculum and different kinds of work experiences and certifications. It's all just, faculty absolutely have to be at the heart of this work at CUNY. And with that in mind, we're really trying to create a lot of different ways that faculty can engage with credit for prior learning, learn more about it, and work to establish opportunities within their own departments. One way is this professional development series that we've been doing this year. We are aiming to offer these sessions as a way of bringing people together and sharing information, examples of great practice at CUNY, basics of our policy, equity angles to consider, bringing in national voices like Wendy and Kale. We're really trying to create that. We would welcome any suggestions or requests for other kinds of sessions that would be useful. So this will be an ongoing effort, and we're really excited to continue the series going into the spring semester. We also, over the last year, we have offered 2 rounds of CALE, which for those that aren't familiar, it's the Council on Adult and Experiential Learning. And they're an organization that's really at the heart of credit for prior learning work and has a very long, deep history nationally of supporting this area of higher ed. And they run many different kinds of professional development sessions, and we have brought them in to do assessing prior learning workshops, which has been structured as a 2-part 2 half-day sessions. About 60 faculty members have participated in the sessions that we've held so far, and this really dives deeper into individualized assessment and best practices for developing departmental exams. We do hope to offer another round of that in the fall or in the spring, so please keep an eye out. Also, our office has developed an online self-paced professional development course that's available in Blackboard, which gives some of the foundational information about how CUNY's policy works and goes quite a bit deeper on the particular mechanisms and sort of what the policy says and how a college may go about interpreting that guidance and implementing their own practices. So I would definitely encourage people to take a look at that, and we are hoping to revise and build upon that course going forward as well. In addition to these professional development opportunities, we have also been convening committees of faculty from multiple campuses to do evaluation of particular credentials and learning experiences that have really broad applicability across the university. So these are certifications and trainings that would allow us, we would love to be able to say to partner organizations or government agencies, yes, any person who has this training experience or who has this certification can come to CUNY and get credit at any CUNY college. But the way that our policy is structured, it really gives a lot of autonomy to colleges to make those decisions themselves at the academic department level. But in the interest of equity and also just really creating as many opportunities as possible, one approach that we've been taking is bringing faculty together from multiple colleges and guiding them through a professional learning evaluation process. They come up with a recommendation that's then shared out to all colleges for consideration and implementation. Over this past year, we have convened committees around the New York State Seal of Biliteracy, which is a designation that's earned by high school students. They demonstrate a high level of proficiency in English and another language, and creating opportunities for those students to receive credit, either language credit or gen ed credit, is an important way of inviting these high achieving learners that have this really important skill into CUNY and fostering that interest and enthusiasm in language, because we know that New York City has a real need for bilingual and biliterate teachers and nurses and any profession you can imagine across sectors. So that was one that we did. There are also many recognized industry credentials in the tech sector. So we brought together a committee of faculty from computer science and other related disciplines to work together on several tech industry credentials that we know have a bunch of different pipelines into CUNY. We're looking at CompTIA, or the committee looked at CompTIA, several CompTIA certifications, as well as CCNA from Cisco, and really looked closely at how those align with existing courses and came up with a recommendation that that went out just a few weeks ago, and we'll be excited to see how both of these take shape as more colleges make decisions about how they'll be recognizing those learning experiences. And the next committee that we're planning to convene is for the Child Development Associate in Early Childhood Education. So more information will be going out to colleges on that pretty soon. And we're really excited to continue this model. We found it to be a nice way to bring together faculty with shared expertise, but different experiences and different perspective on their curriculum. And these committees are all made up of faculty from both senior and community colleges. And we're really interested and excited to engage more faculty in this work. And we're always looking for thoughts and ideas for other credentials that feel like they could have that impact as well.
So in summary, CPL has the potential to advance educational equity and meet the needs of today's diverse learners by recognizing and validating learners' varied experiences through efficient data-informed processes. CPL promotes a more inclusive, flexible, and interconnected post-secondary system while maintaining quality. This approach contributes to the achievement of national educational attainment goals while addressing the evolving needs of the workforce. And AACRAO and others have put together some recommendations that, again, the Learn Commission is working on a broader set of recommendations. But at the beginning, with federal level, they allow Title IV funds, we would hope, to cover CPL fees to improve affordability and accessibility. Establish standards or guidelines for how institutions should structure fees to ensure they are designed in a fair and consistent manner. So right now, the federal level financial aid does not do that and is not allowed. They trialed it for a while and then they stopped. But so we would advocate, hopefully, that is one of the things that can be done later on. That for those accrediting bodies that have specific guidance on the maximum CPL credit that may be awarded, that the accrediting bodies put some language out there. And wanted to ask Alyssa about CUNY, about your specific policy on the number of CPL credits.
So CUNY's policy, the only limit to CPL credits that's CUNY's policy specifies is that CPL credits cannot fulfill residency requirements. So that is that's what our university-wide policy says, and I think that we will be interested to understand and follow the national dialogue on this as well, and any recommendations that may be coming from AACRAO or others to make sure that we're in keeping with practices. But we, as long as students are fulfilling their residency requirements, they should be able to earn CPL credits.
And I remember you saying that earlier, so thank you for bringing that up again. Appreciate you. State level recommendations expand the guidance on how CPL information could be publicly accessed, including within initial admissions applications, orientation programs, and advising. Provide dedicated CPL scholarships or offer subsidies to institutions to lower or eliminate the CPL fees. That is, again, for those institutions that charge fees for this and for public systems. Institution level, some of the things we've talked about is evaluate the return on investment for CPL, considering factors such as enrollment gains, completion rates, and learners' savings to justify allocating internal funding for CPL initiatives. One of the things we need to say to justify the funding for internal CPL initiatives, or a couple of them, is what we just said, is about trying to help offset the fees that are currently charged to learners at some institutions, but also to have the resources available so that the institution can process and increase their number of CPL pathways, have the evaluations and assessments and the trainings that are required for that, and also have the personnel and resources available to talk to the students about it. So there is a cost of standing this up and keeping it going and expanding it. So sometimes you have this ROI discussion and saying, what does this really look like to us? Are we really getting 2.5 times the completers because we award them CPL? Are they really taking 17.5 credits more at our institution? And what does that look like? And that means maybe we actually should be dedicating more funds to it. Create and maintain standardized CPL awareness and engagement and training for faculty and anyone else involved, because it is a very complex process. It's not quite as straightforward as traditional transfer. However, that is changing a little bit. There are AI resources being built by a couple of entities that take in the individual culture of the institution and guidelines and policies and rubrics of faculty at the individual institution for making decisions around credit for prior learning. The fascinating stuff about that technology is that when it's embraced, it's really going to streamline how CPL is evaluated, how it's documented, how it's kept in archives so people know how decisions were made. And the AI learns how to do that over time while remaining at the institutional's level of control and the faculty's level of control. And finally, improve learner awareness of CPL options. And if you're interested, once to answer that question, this QR code will take you to the actual green paper on for the Learn Commission, which has references to the overall the larger benchmarking report and much of the CALE research if you'd like to take a deeper dive.
Yes, thank you so much, Wendy. Your perspective is really valuable, and I think that we really look forward to staying connected with you and AACRAO and continuing to learn from you. And thank you so much for joining us today. And I really, look forward to working with everyone here in the future. Thank you again for joining. Please stay in touch.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.